Hi and welcome to SDI Coffee Break, and hopefully you saw the last one of these. We learned an awful lot about Dan in that last one, and this is the second extract, the second video vlog, whatever you want to call them, in a series of vlogs where we're talking to Dan about AI. So hi Dan, nice to see you back again. Seems
Likewise.
like we haven't seen each other forever. You know what I mean?
Well, I bared my soul in that last session, so I'm not sure what value I have left to share.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more, but that was really good. We learned an awful lot. We talked in the last one briefly about what this series is, and I think this series will be an evolving thing as we go through it, not just in this set, but beyond that as well. Maybe over weeks and months, maybe as we do more. And I wanted to start with sort of AI, demystifying it, because I think it is quite, when we talk about AI, it's sort of such a broad area. There's so much ambiguity. There's no real, I don't think, I might be wrong, but there's a lack of definition in between what bits of stuff does what and what it is and how do you describe AI. So maybe let's start with that, right? Let's talk about AI. How would you describe AI? Yeah, and maybe the different sort of types of AI, maybe that you've had experience in developing as well, if that makes sense, yeah? So how would you describe AI?
In the AI community, we talk most frequently about the definition as taking tasks traditionally done by humans and automating them. In terms of the concept of artificial intelligence, it's not something new. Newsflash, it's been around a while. In fact, the coin was termed in the 50s. Professor at Dartmouth College in the United States in New Hampshire named Marvin Minsky pulled together a few friends, psychologists, doctors, computer scientists, and they hatched this term, artificial intelligence, thinking that eventually they could essentially, recreate or automate the decision-making process, essentially create like a digital brain. That was ambitious. AI since then has gone through what we call AI summers and AI winters. We're very much in an AI summer right now. There's a lot of enthusiasm, but there's also a lot of apprehension. And so I think what we're going to talk about in the next few minutes is where there's enthusiasm, but also where there's apprehension, and what the SDI community needs to know to kind of demystify the concept of AI.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's really interesting, actually. You talk about the digital brain and the stuff behind that. And, I'm a bit of a geek, man. And, when you go back into the 50s and you see the premise of robots, not only in trade shows, and the World Fair, but also in films as well. It's some amazing, technology that feels real. Wow, man, you know what I mean? Like Robbie the Robot and stuff like that, Forbidden Planet, wow, R2-D2, wow. So I think, yeah, it's a very interesting topic for the 12-year-old in my brain, right, that still sort of exists in there. So let's talk about that digital brain thing, the different types of AI, Dan. If you look at maybe closed systems, neural networks, how would you start to describe what the differences are between some of them maybe? Let's start with maybe rules-based. So rules-based system. Let's think about maybe a chatbot, for example. And when we talk about intents and things like that, how does that chatbot work? How do you create a chatbot, and what's the point?
So before there were what we call chatbots today, there were, call them decision systems, where you'd provide some deterministic workflows or rules. When the user says exactly this or picks exactly this from a menu, do this. And it might seem conversational because it might be different dialogues stitched together, but it was all what we call deterministic. Couldn't go off the path. As you introduce more intelligence into the conversation, you move into what we probably now call virtual agents. And that's where you may actually be able to use AI, or a subfield of AI, natural language processing, or NLU, natural language understanding, to automatically detect the intent of the user and then map the intent of the user to some kind of a topic or a dialogue. And that's where you call it virtual agents that seem intelligent, although in fact, there's just one bit of innovation on top of a traditional decision system, and that's actually being able to do some processing of natural language, so you don't need to say or type the exact set of words in the exact order. You can use your natural language, and the AI-based virtual agent will interpret what you're saying and hopefully respond in a semi-intelligent way. So that's been the evolution. There's going to be an increasing progression of virtual agents getting smarter. But that's kind of where we've come.
And that intent thing is interesting, you know, when I've looked into this stuff, as any geek would do, right? You look at that intent sort of thing and the development of a workflow, a set of processes. I mean, really, when you look at it, when you talk about desired outcomes, when you look at CSFs, when you look at KPIs, there's no real sort of, it's the same language. I think, is that fair to say? It's pretty much the same thing. We're looking at what do we want to achieve and how do we get there? Is that pretty much it?
Well, one of the things that has given the industry a black eye is expecting a more intelligent experience that kind of spans n number of domains. The smartest AI today is trained in a very narrow domain. Let's take the example of IT and HR virtual agents. As long as you stay on the page and you ask it about your benefits, your paid time off, you ask it, how to fix your Mac, how do I install Chrome? You can make a virtual agent seem very intelligent now. It can be interactive. It can understand that domain. But when you ask it, where's the best Balti in Birmingham, likely an IT or an HR virtual agent will respond with, can I create a ticket? I don't know anything about Balti, right? So it's very easy to, quote, trick a virtual agent today, but that's because I think the popular press has set inappropriate expectations for what a virtual agent can do.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a lot of hype, isn't it? A lot of hype. And you must use some of this stuff. I use it. If you think about Google Assistant and Siri and Cortana, all this, I mean, they're out there. And I think for the most part, probably for me, they cause more frustration than outcomes. But I think you're right. I think it's understanding as a user how to use it. How it's going to assist rather than trying to fight it or expect it sort of, I don't know, to get up in the morning and make you a cup of tea and some eggs. I don't know, And what about then, right? So, all right, with this closed system, and I think we all get, and maybe we'll come on to maybe how closed systems can support, as you just said, that point of triage in a service desk environment, in a support environment, that maybe can manage lower skilled, is that the right term? Lower skilled, maybe workloads before it hands off to a human. We might come on to some of that and maybe what you're seeing. But what about neural networks? Now that, I think, is a more complex arena. What is a neural network? How does that work? How does it function?
Yeah, so we talk about two primary ways to develop AI. One being using supervised learning techniques, and the other being using unsupervised learning techniques. Neural nets, broadly speaking, are used for things like machine vision, where you're traversing a large number of layers, let's say in an image, to figure out what a cat is versus a dog is. Mm-hmm. Supervised learning is what you're more frequently going to encounter in narrow domains, again, like probably something more relevant to our listeners, IT and HR topics. So that's where you're going to take labeled data. And by label, I mean you feed data into the algorithm, whether it's linear regression or Bayesian inference, or maybe deep learning in a neural net. But you're feeding it data that contains the right answer. And let's say in the case of NLP for intent detection, you're giving it a bunch of patterns to learn from. So when it sees a question about taxes versus a question about installing Chrome, it can detect the most likely way to respond to a tax question versus a Chrome installation question. So neural nets is really just one technology, one of many. But as part of this conversation, demystifying AI, I'd say we should focus more on the personas, the use cases, kind of the what, more than the how, which is the algorithms and when to use a neural net versus when to use linear regression.
It's interesting because that really interests me. Again, if you break that down into that decision-making algorithm thing, if you can just stretch into that and learn a little bit more, and I'm not great, I'm not a programmer, but if you can just practice it, it does lift the veil a little bit on what the possibility is and how this stuff really works. I tell you what, look, we're gonna, the thing is with this, right? It can become complicated, isn't it? We've already had a really complicated conversation, right? So I think we're going to continue to try and demystify, I think, as we go through this. So we're gonna stop this session now. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you for our listeners for listening as well. And we'll carry on this conversation and try to continue to demystify or do the demystification better in the next one. So thank you for listening. Thank you.